Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of Kuralt Galain, and we're gonna continue today with chapters 11 and 12. That is more chapters of Book 2 of Fall of Light, and I hope I'll be able to actually remember what I just read. We'll see how far I come with this. I'm still kind of confused because life and stuff. Anyway, I guess let's do this. Cheers. All right, so we spend our time mostly in like chapter 11. We spend our time most of the time, actually more or less all of it, in Urisander's camp, or the Leosan camp, if you want to call it that. And most of that time is looking at like the different like machinations that are going on there, and so forth. So we're basically watching the further downfall of light, I guess. And there's a few like interesting things going on there. One certainly is about like how religions work. When we see what Sintara tries to achieve together with her former rival um, uh, High Priestess of Mother Dark, Lenara, something like that. I'm reading it with her name. Anyway, those two trying to set up Father Light and Mother Dark, and the ideas that they have behind that, right? The ideas, and there's a few things to talk about there. The idea that it's the priesthood that should mediate between gods and the commonality, and by which they obviously mostly mean decide and rule, because apparently both Mother Dark and Urisander are not very much interested in actually ruling those religions, or whatever you want to call it. And this is an interesting aspect of religion in general. And I'm going to ramble about for a second there. The idea is that priesthood has exclusive knowledge, or an exclusive access, or exclusive knowledge, basically, to interpret divine writings, or revelations, or whatever you want to call them, holy texts, is something that is deeply ingrained, for example, in Catholicism, and in some parts of the more structured, like the Anglican Church, for example. Not so much in parts of Protestantism, and some of those that came later on, which is something that I once again have for like personal interest in because of my studies. That being the idea that doing away with such a priesthood on a theological level, obviously, because you can't do it just on like a political level, is about a huge act of democracy, of equal rights. Because the question that you have is like, what, like, if everyone can have the same access to a deity, or that deity's pronouncements, which is usually what you get. I mean, the idea of a religion in the very, very easy, like very simple terms, is you have a deity that gives you power, or bestows some other advantage on its believers. Those being in our, mostly in our like real world, that is usually some kind of salvation after death. I mean, that's sort of what we all strive for, right? I mean, not me, but in general, like the idea is like, as a believer, you believe firmly that if you follow the rules for good living set out by your deity, you will be rewarded by some kind of salvation of your immortal soul. Now, obviously, that's not exactly how religion works in the Malazan universe, or in Kuralt Galain. We still don't have like a really good idea of how that kind of religion will work in the end, because they're still like sort of figuring out how to do religion, apart from just the bare idea of there's some kind of transfer of power, in a way, right? Some form of blessing comes down to the adherents of whatever religion through the god that can give them power in exchange for worship. There's some kind of exchange. Now, the exchange in our day and age, in our form of religion, is usually you adhere to rules of behavior and you get whatever comes after death in exchange, which is a pretty easy to do, pretty relaxed kind of deal compared to the sacrifice blood and get power magic kind of thing that we see here. Something that we have also in a more like classic, like polytheistic religions, right? With Greek, classical Greek religion, as far as we know it, it's very, those transactions between believers and gods were very, very explicit. And also more or less everyone had access to those gods. With the more like weirder, like more, I don't want to say refined, but more metaphysical, which is also a word I didn't want to use here, form of religion that we have with Christianity, for example. And I'm using Christianity here as an example because that's the one I kind of know the most about. It became very early on the case that through all kinds of for all kinds of reasons, that the priesthood, the church, set itself as an intermediary between God and the rest of the populace, which by claiming that they have specific, like special access to knowledge, to like interpretations and whatnot of Holy Scripture. We, as I said, with the Catholic Church, that is very much the case. With Protestantism, that was ideally not so much the case, because everyone is basically has, at least when you look at like more non-conformist Protestantism in England, for example, and then in the US, it's like the idea is that everyone reads Scripture and makes its own interpretation, and all of those interpretations are equally valid. And we'll see how that works out, because the problem there is that has like, as soon as you try to actually put some kind of structure on faith and turn it into religion, those problems show up. But the idea that we have here is that in whatever way, like a form of equality for soldiers to abolish in whatever way that feudalistic structure of the country of Coral Gawain will not happen through such a rigid faith-based religious structure as Sintara is imagining, and as that other high priestess whose name I'll certainly remember at some point are imagining, because they will just like exchange in a way the secular power structure of different noble houses, which I don't know where that one came from, but never mind. They'll just exchange that one through they replace it with a religious power structure that once again makes sure that like life is extremely rigid and organized and so forth, and putting specific people in the key position, making them arbiters of faith, and then like as an extension of that, almost life and death, which is fucked up. Just saying. Anyway, I was just like saying that like these discussions about like access to divine revelation, to scripture, to the as you will, the will of gods, is a discussion that we as humans have had on and off for at least the last 400 years, explicitly, when we also, around say the Glorious Revolution in England, mixed those religious themes and that question of like religious access and access to religious faith and religious interpretations and so forth, when those at the same time were mixed extremely complicated ways with political questions, especially in England, right? You have that whole idea around the Glorious Revolution. You have where those are once again, like these different religious positions are once again espoused by different political parties, right? You have the Church of England, the High Church, the Anglican Church being espoused by the Stuarts, or the remainders of the Stuarts, are not even the Stuarts at this point, but Queen Anne, who has like some kind of weird ties to whoever, to William of Orange, right? And on the other hand, you have the German succession, which is kind of espoused by the more nonconformist parts of England, to make it very, very basic. So yeah, you can see parallels to that in our world all the time. Anyway, just sorry for this like really long distraction that didn't make any sense, but maybe you found something interesting here. Otherwise, go read some history books, or go read the writings of John Locke or John Toland if you really feel like it. And not that John Locke thing of property. Forget that one. And now let's look at another like one of those people in Sanders' camp, that being Segunda, the so-called scholar and tutor. And there's a lot of things to unpack here, because we see once again his, dare I call it, philosophy of like a natural order in society, or society having a natural order. The idea that some people are by birth qualified to higher positions than others, and so forth. And that obviously is something that we see or have seen in world history over and over, where we talk about the fact that some people are by their nature best qualified to be in a specific rank in society. I'm not going to go all the way. Oh, well, I could go all the way back to everyone's favorite philosopher, not mine, I should say, Aristotle, who, in his Politics, clearly explains that slavery is good because slaves are, for all kinds of reasons, best to actually achieve their goal in life and their like perfect satisfaction by using their capabilities to the fullest as slaves. That's like a natural thing for him. Now, don't get me wrong, that is obviously that's obviously fucked up. It also has very little to do with like racist slavery as we talk about it most of the time nowadays, because while there is some of that obviously in classical Greece as well, there's also like debt slavery and all kinds of other slaveries. But the idea is clearly that some people are, by virtue of birth and their nature, best suited to a specific role in society, and that goes for all of those different roles in society, which once again is fucked up and wrong. And obviously we don't we should all know that nowadays. The things that make a specific person capable of specific jobs are mostly almost exclusively training. Now obviously there's some things that you still can't do because of like natural limitations. Like I mean I could not become a fighter pilot most of the time, I guess. At least for now. But those are like very rare instances. But everything else, people are equal, and it's like their upbringing and all those other things around them that like make them suited for specific roles in society, if you will. The idea of a natural order is just fundamentally wrong and fucked up. Luckily, we know that Segunda is an asshole, so it's very easy to understand that his ideas are wrong. But another thing that we see here is obviously, this is interesting to look at, right? Segunda thinking of himself as a really, really good scholar, which he obviously apparently is not. He never had any success as a scholar. He just ended up being a private tutor at Draconis' house, and now he is not even that. And Now, I should not do this because it's just the internet and all of that. But look at people who had like very high opinions of their qualifications, were not successful in that, and then thought about like a society with like where people were actually qualified by nature to be specific people or to not be people at all. Do any come to mind? Anyway, I think it's very obvious to see how such a like that point where you realize where you think of yourself too highly, or in a way have a very specific opinion of your capabilities, and come up against like the reality of that not being the case, can lead to all kind of trouble. Now, the difficulty obviously here is, we don't really know with Segunda yet. Did he not make it because he was too intellectually not suited for the job of an actual scholar and academic? And there's like pointers to say probably yes, because he's not exactly the kind of person who has a very open mind. But it could also just be frustration and all the stratification and all the machinations and all the other bullshit that goes on in every kind of academia, which is far more about publicity, about public standing, about all these social aspects than about gaining knowledge at this point. Not because scholars in general want that to be the case, but because we force certain outside rules on it, right? Academia is fucked up because we expect it to work like like businesses, which it doesn't. It goes in a very different way. Or in earlier times, we expected it to work like, say, a court, with all these like rankings about prestige being more important than actually doing research. So we don't know if Segunda fell to the wayside because he failed at those games, because from what we've seen so far, he's not a nice person to hang around, or if he failed because of his of being actually a bad scholar. We just don't know. Anyway, we see him like digging deeper and deeper into his madness. Obviously, losing his leg didn't help, but it's important to understand that his ideas of society that he proclaims or thinks about are fundamentally wrong. No, no doubt about it. All right. What else should we talk about there? Because we see the entirety of like the camp of the Leosan being everything that Centaura claims light is not. It's involved in all kinds of petty power struggles. Order is breaking down. Discipline is breaking down. And, you know, they're all corrupt. And this is, I guess, the other thing that we should look at here. And a very, very problematic thing that is going on here. Not saying that it's problematic, like that the writing is problematic, but it points out something very problematic that has happened over time. And I see Stephen Erickson trying to go against that flow. Or that, like, I don't even want to call it trope because it goes way beyond tropes, convention or whatever. At some point in human history, we have associated, once again, this is like one of those things that I've spoken about before, the idea that we take things and assign them moral values as well. And one of those things, one of the basic ones that we struggle with as a society today still, is that we even say this, like some things are not morally black and white, but the idea there is that like everyone, or almost everyone, thinks of white as good and black or dark as compromised or whatever. Now there may be, I'm not an evolutionary psychologist or anything like that. There may be literally like the basis of that may be that whole like night and dark thing, night and day thing that since we're more afraid of the dark because we can't see in the dark and shit like that, that we assign like negative things to darkness and positive things to light because we can see in the daylight, and we're like by habit as humans more like daylight creatures. I know not people on the internet, but yes, we are as a species we tend to be daylight creatures. It may that be that that may just be the case why we tend to assign positive things to light and negative things to darkness. But the problem remains. The problem is extremely virulent. That when we do the light dark thing, it's one step further from that to white and black, and we all know where that thing is going. Now, why do I say this is an interesting thing? Because we see the same thing happening here, but we see it consciously happening by Sintara explaining or building up her religion of light explicitly to be about justice, knowledge, moral rectitude, and all these things. And darkness not being like that at this point, because darkness is far away from that, from like having someone. High Priestess Lanier, something Lanier is still. See, I'm getting there to the name. Anyway, is still far away from like building up her like religious dogma in such a organized way as Sintara is. But anyway, so we have that assigning of moral values to something that is at best just a condition of illumination. A physical illumination, right? That's like the other thing there that we need to like. It's in our language already that we have like light and dark associated with all these things. And the Enlightenment is like rationality and so forth, and darkness is seen of obscurity in the words like already darkness, obscure, occult. You got those ways. It's fucked up. It's in our minds, and it has a lot of problems. But seeing that Stephen Erickson writes it this way, and we see the conscious construction of or connection of specific moral values with the condition of light or the condition of darkness, makes that very explicit, which I personally really appreciate. It also is the case that when you look at the overall story of the world, it's not exactly that those guys, those white people there, the Leosan, are the good guys. They may think of themselves as the good guys. Everyone does. But from the outside, when we look at it, I'm pretty sure most of us will understand that they are not the good guys. They're corrupt. They're like whole entire movement started on flawed motives. Well, some of the motives might have been good. Started with flawed motives and flawed methods, and building up a very rigid system of overt justice and so forth just makes them into terrible fascists. So it's kind of inverting over time, inverting the whole like light and dark tropes that we or conventions that we have built into our language and thinking in so many ways, at least here in the West, in the traditions of Western literature and mythology and whatnot, since more or less forever. Now, the other thing there, obviously, is, and that's another thing that I find very interesting, is that it's Father Light and it's Mother Dark, and those are like the other like side of it, right? Is the idea that you have a lot of ideas, and I'm not good enough an anthropologist, but I'm not an anthropologist to actually verify any of that. But when you look at this whole idea of like the switch from matriarchal to patriarchal societies or structures, mythologies and whatnot, it's always those like patriarchal societies that are connected with these ideas that the Leosan are connected with. So casting the Leosan with Father Light as such a flawed society, which they are, a morally corrupt society, is also very much a way to subvert or look at that whole idea of a of how we switch from like the the matriarchal societies and whatever into a patriarchal society, and what we lost, or maybe what we lost in the way. What we lost there, obviously, is a willingness to embrace uncertainty in a way, because that's like the other thing. Like what we get with Father Light and the well-constructed religion there is like we get absolute certainty as believers. Now, maybe Sintara does have uncertainties. We don't know, but as right, it's like it's prescriptive. We just need to ask, we'll get an answer, and that's like a definitive answer, which once again is something that we also kind of tend to get with certain parts of organized religion. We go and ask a priest. They tell us. If they don't know, they bump it up to like the bishop. If the bishop doesn't know, he bumps it up to the cardinal. If the cardinal doesn't know, he bumps it up to the pope. Ideally, obviously, it doesn't always work like that, but that's kind of how it ideally works. And then our pope, as good Catholics, our pope proclaims something ex cathedra, and then it's the definitive answer. So that's like the other like big question there between like uncertainty as personified by Mother Dark, who is so aloof that she doesn't even answer in any way, and absolute certainty, but like a prescriptive certainty that we get with Father Light, or not actually with Father Light, but with his high priestess, Sintara, because most questions will never actually arrive with Father Light, because he's not even interested in that shit. So yeah, that's kind of what we see there and what we get there. On like a more world building side of things, we also see Hunral adopting or creating for himself the name Mortal Sword. So we see like how the structure of religions that we see later on in the Malazan Book of the Fallen is slowly emerging in a way. We have like a high priest or high priestess. We have Mortal Sword. We obviously don't have a shield anvil yet. We see that Hunral didn't want to be destriant, so we'll see how that kind of thing will work out. But you know, we've also finally heard at least about all three of those daughters of Father Shadow, which obviously doesn't make any sense. Like familial relationships as presented to us in the Malazan Book of the Fallen are very different from what we learn in in Carcanas, but at least now in chapter 11, we first hear about Menendor being somewhere as a hostage, because we meet her mother, who is very much of a cynic, but also a very realistic person when it comes to the whole movement and everything. So there's that. We obviously know that Sukul and Kadu, Sister Dapple, is obviously a hostage at Hishtula's place. We've already met her, and we've seen Shaltatha Lore, the beloved sister and goddess of the Tist Edur. Well, we've met her, and we've seen her develop her own magical powers. One of them is seeing an aura or something like that, so that's going to be interesting to look at in the future. So yeah, there's that. We also need to talk about Hunral's encounter with Olar Ethil, or as someone puts it bluntly, him fucking a cook fire, which, yeah, it's a very good line. I have to say that. By which we come once again to like something that I need to. I'm not quite sure how this all will be work out in the end. How this all will work out in the end. But we see more and more Azathanai involvement in the how to say, in the things the Teist are about. I'm sorry, I'm missing a word here because I'm an idiot. Anyway, my point being that they more of them are getting involved, and it remains to be seen in which direction this all will go. Why am I kind of worried about that? Because we can look at what has happened so far as a natural evolvement, or the natural evolution of society, or of the types being stupid dickheads who don't do what we as thinking people should do, which is analyze our environment and make the correct decisions. They don't do that. They burn down their places, they ruin their forests, they overhunt, and now they're on their way into a civil war, which, we as a species aren't really smart. On the other hand, depending on how much of an involvement certain Azathanae have, it kind of takes away a lot of the blame for larger events from the actors on the ground. I'm not sure how I'll react to that, but that, I guess, remains to be seen in the future. Because obviously also Azathanae have motives, and I guess that's sort of like the main interesting thing here is exactly that. That unlike, say, a lot of like deities in our classic myth that we know, Azathanae have rather human, like more three-dimensional motives compared to a lot of what we see in Greek and Roman myths. Not that they don't have like very human motives, but the way mythology is usually written is obviously one that makes characters into just like ciphers for specific things, archetypes, and so on, whatnot. So having these rather like obscure people like all those Azathanae with their different, like all kinds of different motives, makes it kind of more interesting. But still, it's a question to keep in mind for the future. All right, let's move on to chapter 12. Lots of fun. Lots of Thalakai doing Thalakai things, and also Skillendro, whom I really like at this point because he just seems to cause trouble wherever he goes. I just love the fact that whenever it's some species, some place, some realm, some group of people is mentioned, Skillendro's like, oh, I shouldn't go back there because they don't like me anymore. So yeah, I am very very happy about that. He's maybe not yet my favorite Azathanae. That might still be Grizzled, but he's certainly catching up. I like him a lot for just like being that person who just everyone hates because he's done something really dumb everywhere. Especially like losing a floating mountain. I feel a certain kinship to him because I tend to do like things because they feel like a good idea, and then I lose track of things. So obviously I can't just pick up a mountain from the seaside and make it into like a skykeep, which I guess is what it is in the end. I can't just do that, but if I could, I totally would, and I'm pretty sure I would lose it after 5 minutes. So yeah, Skillendro, master at burning bridges, certainly my kind of guy. What else do we have? We see more of like him. One of the three, like of that first group, he's still like in the dragon fever on his way to becoming soul taken dragon, I guess, or dying. We'll see. What I really enjoyed was the showing up of everyone's favorite tyrant, Raced. And he's just as annoying now as he is later on, although you can see where he's like, where he kind of went wrong, or where that idea, and I guess that's like something that is helpful in a way, to see that his like later tyrannical predilections come from that idea of creating a perfect society in a way. So there are like good motives behind it, but he then realized that apparently he can't do that without becoming a tyrant. I don't know. We'll see where that is going. I was just happy to see him show up, as well as see all the fun conversations between Skillen and Cruel. The whole discussion, and Mail obviously showing up and being pissed off, which Yeah, male. Always, always put upon by the rest of the world. So I feel that that chapter does a lot of like just like establishing more Azathanai things in a way, and the idea of like an organized society and how outside events or random events can be put into like some kind of organization. We also see once again that idea of polarity that we've seen so often put up. That's like everything is always polar, and we have like one of those ideas that there's always that like duality in social classes or professions that Skillen and Carul discuss when they're walking through that anthill or ant city in a way, when they're, you know, talking about things like that politicians, like inventors, philosophers, politicians, historians, each like being these pairs of people that hate each other because of the nature of their jobs. Which once again comes to that idea that there are like specific, that there is something of a specific nature to what you might call vocations or roles in society, and that those are usually that those should ideally balance each other out in a way. So yeah, that was just like an interesting and fun thing. I am still kind of figuring out what the whole like difference between Thelakai and Thelaman and all of that is, and how Toblakai come to be in the future. But I guess we'll probably figure it out at some point. As I said, I'm not good with like world building stuff. Not my forte. Not that I have any kind of like strength, but overall, I just enjoyed the whole Lasaruk conversations and the Thalakai humor. I just really enjoy all of that. I also really appreciated that thing that we have with the three husbands of her, and we have all three of them, and we get like what Stephen Erickson does so well and has done so well in all the Malazan books as well. We have like that very focused inner monologue or inside view where we see what drives them, like people to be specific in a specific way, and we see how one of them, like the idea of like fear making the young one so overtly bold, and they are also being driven by fear of like plagues and whatnot. I just appreciated the way he used that to show how they come to understand over time why so many people are following Hood's call, are going to join his war against death and his war against, the general unfairness of the universe. So that's something that I just appreciated in the way it was done. And as I said before, it's like I totally get why people want to fight death and want to go up against like the general unfairness of the universe. It's totally my jam. I mean, I'm in. Just show me where to go. Anyway, another thing that I found very interesting was the discussion about Chain Jamal, and the idea of regulating time or pinning it down, the idea of like subjective perception and objective measurement and what those things can do. Because remember, like that idea that I never really understood when it is mentioned in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, of the chain doing something to chaos or to creation itself that will ultimately destroy it. I'm still not sure if I understand it, but I think I've come closer to understanding it when looking at the idea that we can, that yes, in our like everyday life, in our daily life, we tend to like witness even regular things subjectively in like very irregular ways. Like I guess we all know that feeling. It's like you grow up and years just zip by or like take forever, right? You grow up and it takes forever from like the time between your birthday and Christmas takes forever, unless you're obviously born in, I don't know, December or January. But after that, it takes forever, and school years take forever, and then you reach a specific age, or you go to university and suddenly one semester is far fast, zips by far faster. I imagine it goes even worse when you grow older. Like, well, yeah, I know it kind of goes fast. The perception of time is, even on that level, is like very, very subjective. When you have a lot of time, it can just like zoom past, or it can stretch, and yeah, we know that kind of thing. But if you take, and this is like a really interesting question, like when you, for the first time, when you are the first person or first creature to actually accurately and objectively measure things, put those things like into a way to measure them, or into a structure that is outside of your own brain, what does that actually do to your perception, and what does that do to the outside world, if we assume that a lot of that is actually not the outside world but things happening in our brains? So that's something that I'm really interested in to look at in the future. Anyway, I feel like I've rambled way too far afield today. I hope you still enjoyed it. If you made it this far, then thanks for watching. And yeah, I'll talk to you tomorrow about more Fall of Light, I guess. Until then, cheers.